What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Providence Perspective. I'm Jay, the report for the dude. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. And please help me and join me in welcoming my friend Alan, aka Polite Leader. What's going on, Alan? How you doing?
Doing good, Jay. How you doing, man? It's always a pleasure to be on your show, your podcast. Enjoyed. I think I've been on here a couple of times now, so I'm almost like a regular.
Yeah, I think this might be your fourth
Oh,
time,
is it
third
really?
time,
Wow, lost
something
count.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been we've been doing this now for a while, and it's funny. We are here to talk about the comments from a certain pastor, Joel Webbon, whom I actually think that you and I owe our friendship to some extent, even though we're not going to completely be agreeing with everything that he's saying here. But yeah, you and I met at the very first Right Response conference, and it was Joel that introduced us. Funnily
Yeah.
enough, do you recall that?
Vaguely, I do recall that uh, Joel had reached out to me a long time ago. This is probably a couple of years ago. So he had actually reached out to me because I had done a video that was very positive about him because I guess he had been used to taking heat at that time,
Mm.
a lot of criticism. But here I was producing a video because I was like sort of rising in terms of subscribers around that time. Obviously, I've cooled down lately. I haven't been pushing as hard for my channel because fatigue and work and all kinds of other things, and even desire, to be honest with you. But at that time, he had reached out to me and he's like, "Well, this guy's saying things positive about me," and then he thanked me and we got an interview together. He was able to come on the channel and we did an interview. It went great. It was fantastic. He sent me a free ticket for the conference, and I went. That's 2022, I think, if I remember correctly. And yeah, I do remember meeting you there. We had a great conversation. It was a great fellowship. Dr. Joe Boot was there. James White was there. I thought
Mm.
everybody was on the same page. It was like one big old happy family, and things have obviously
Yeah,
changed a bit.
just a bit, just a, just a little bit, right? It's not like
Just a little
anybody's
bit.
hurling insults at each other or anything like that.
No, nothing like that.
Nothing like that. But yeah, man. So I recall Joel. I was speaking with Joel, and so he says, "By the way, have you met Alan?" And I remember looking at you. I was like, "I don't think I recognize him." But Joel was speaking highly of you. He's like, he's got this YouTube channel and this and that. So have you, have you heard of Polite Leader? And I'm like, man, that sounds familiar, but I'm not really sure. And you and I are talking, right?
Mhm.
And you're describing your channel, and I don't remember exactly what you said, but you said something about a video that you had done, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, I remember this dude." And all of a sudden, I put it together. I was like, "Oh man, you got a huge YouTube channel, actually." Because you have like what, like over 100,000 subscribers or something like that at this point, right?
Yeah, I think it's falling though. I think it was at close to 125, and then it started going backwards. Now it's at 123,000. So people get tired of the same voice after the time. A lot of the people probably were watching because I was doing videos on the secret friendly movement and word of faith movement. I've kind of geared away from that, so to speak.
Yeah,
So that's cool. People move on to different things. They move on to new YouTubers and things like that, and that's fine. I think it might have been a time period where I was kind of hot. I mean, I think I was hot in that 2019, 2020 era or something like that. But it was just a season where videos were doing really well in terms of viewership, and that happens. But yeah,
yeah. There's ups and downs.
there you go.
But yeah, I do remember, because I wasn't like subscribed to your channel or anything like that, but I do remember I had seen a couple of your videos, like maybe, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years before that, somewhere around there. You started what, like in 2017?
Started in November of 2017. Most of those early videos would be gone. They were like called expose videos on Hollywood and the entertainment industry and music videos, things like that. A lot of wild speculation and things like that. So I kind of privatized those because I wanted to be careful not to bear false witness against my neighbor.
Sure. Yeah.
So then,
It's
and
fine.
then one of the Hillsong videos did really well, and then a Joel Osteen video did really well. So maybe I should move in this direction. Got to know Justin Peters, so it was a discernment channel particularly focused on the Word of Faith movement and the seeker friendly movement at that period in time, and then eventually moved away from that. Right now, the hope is to do some videos on Judaism and Eastern Orthodoxy. We'll
Mm,
see how that goes. Got to do some reading in that area.
yeah. EO is That's actually a big topic right now because we have a lot of people. Well, it's funny. I haven't seen that many people like moving towards Eastern Orthodoxy lately, but I would say maybe like a year ago, um, and maybe like a range from a year ago, and then 2 years before that, up to that, I saw like a mass exodus from like the reform world heading east. In fact, there's even one guy that I used to know. I don't know where he is now, who was reformed, and in a span of maybe like a year and a half, this dude goes from reformed to Lutheran, back to reformed, back to Lutheran, to Roman Catholic, and landed in Eastern Orthodoxy. And as far as I know, he's still there.
That's
Uh,
quite a ride.
yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, at one point, I remember people like calling him out and basically saying like, um, dude, I can't take anything you say seriously. Because one of the things that he would do, one of the things that he would do is that every time he would jump ship from one denomination or one tradition, if you want to call it that, is basically put heavily criticize the tradition he just left, right? And he would act as if he was always in his current tradition, denomination, whatever. And he's like, yeah, no, these people suck and they're idiots and blah blah blah. And so, I mean, just really, really, just ungracious. And but just a guy that was being blown around by every wind of doctrine, absolutely no stability at all. And I don't know what happened to him. I think he blocked me. So
Sorry.
that's all I. That's all.
Maybe not sorry. Yeah, I don't know the lore of Eastern Orthodoxy. I don't get it. Like, if you look at historians, whether they be Protestant or Roman Catholic or non-Christian or whatever, there is no way to defend icon veneration as a practice of the apostles or the early church. It's just not there. It's not in the literature. Yet the Second Council of Nicaea says this is something that we get from the apostles and the early church. So to hold to something that false, it just stuns me that so many people do that. Now I know they've got their arguments, development arguments, but anyway, this video is not about Eastern Orthodoxy.
It's all good, man. Yeah, in fact, this video is really more conversational. We're not going to, we might look at some biblical texts, but it's going to be more of our personal impressions more than anything, right? Because Joel recently released a video, or I guess it's a clip of a larger video, right? And the name of the clip is First Generation Immigrants Can Never Be True Americans. And so I'm kind of in this weird boat. Like, you're a first generation immigrant or second generation?
Well, I don't think I would be. My parents immigrated here, but I wasn't born here. I was born in India. I came here when I was 2 years old.
Okay.
So technically, I would be a first generation immigrant if we got down to the logistics and stuff.
Okay.
I don't think I'd be considered a second generation. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up here, that. I don't know. That to me is kind of iffy. How do we define somebody who grew up here, even if they weren't born physically here? I don't know if that would be necessarily first generation. It just depends on how you define it, I guess. But in any case, I'm kind of in this weird boat, right? Where I come from a very unique culture, and I'm Puerto Rican, obviously, and Puerto Ricans have been American citizens since 1903, 1910, somewhere around there. I don't remember. I know it was very, very early 20th century. And we have a history of fighting in American wars, obviously, on the side of the Americans. My grandfather, was in the military, World War II. And we have this sort of weird, I think it might be like before Hawaii became a state, kind of like the same idea, right? Like you have one foot in America, but at the same time, there's this unique culture in our island that, it is not exactly like the rest of America. Though there are subcultures like that all around America. I would say, for example, Louisiana, you have the Cajuns, or you have the people from Appalachia, right? Who even have sort of a different language. Not a whole lot of them speak it, but there are these very, very interesting subcultures all over the United States, and the United States is a huge country. So even defining what is American, I think there are some principles that we can say, okay, yeah, that's definitely American, but there are some things where it gets kind of iffy. And I think we're gonna look at Joel's video in just a second here, but I think that he oversimplifies that a little bit. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I was talking about the same subject with my pastor, and like, what? That's a good question. Like, what is an American? If we could maybe boil it down to some like simple summary, some simple guidelines, it's A, B, C, and X, Y, and Z. Because even if you talk about white Americans, right? Let's just exclude non-white Americans. There is a substantial difference between a white American who lives in the Upper East Side of Manhattan and a white American who lives in, South Texas in a small town,
Right.
or even if one that lives in South Central Los Angeles. There are white people who live there. So you're talking about three really different cultures within a larger culture of what we
Mhm.
call America. And well, I'll just make my comments later on about Aristotle and others after we get into it.
We'll definitely touch on that, I'm sure, because there's this perspective of like Joel. I think you were telling me has kind of even if he hasn't said it, you can see it in his theology. His theology has changed. A year ago, we were talking about like presuppositionalism and postmillennialism and theonomy and all these things, and like the seven doctrines to rule the world, right? Like I thought we were on the same page here, and all of a sudden it's how to defeat trash world. Well, apparently by any means necessary, and aligning yourself with anybody that's willing to fight for a common goal, even if they have a different way to go about it,
I
right?
want to
And
be careful
so
what I say here, because elders are due double honor. But and you may disagree. As Pastor Webbon's theology has changed, it seems to me his attitude has changed too. He seems to have gotten a lot more cocky, a lot more arrogant, and he's made statements like "No one will remember your name," and he's
right,
apologized for that. So I'm not going to hold that against him. But he's made comments such as "I'm like one of the best we've got," and other statements like that, which I'm like, is this really something a pastor should be saying?
right,
I don't see a history of the pastors that I've known making those kinds of statements about themselves.
right. And that is something that I've noticed that I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. Like I don't know what's going on with him because from a very personal note, like me speaking with a couple of friends that have followed him in the past, but now we're seeing this shift with him. We're like, what is going on, dude? Like, this is not the same Joel that we knew, you know, 6 months ago, a year ago, etc. Right? Like, he's different. And yeah, I think you are seeing that those things that we're noticing, right? Like there is a bit of arrogance to some of the things that he has said, and like you said, absolutely, he did apologize for the "no one will remember your name" comments, but it's not just that, right? There's like a pattern, and
Yeah, it's
so
more than that. Um, and I think John Harris had told him, Joel, you can't be saying these kinds of things. But then
yeah,
he said them subsequently, not exactly something that strong, but similar things at least. And I'm thinking, I don't know. I'm just trying to get my head around the whole situation. But if you were to twist my arm right now and ask me, where do I align theologically, thought wise, in all sorts of different areas, I'd say I align a lot more closely with Apologia and the Ezra Institute and Dr. James White and maybe even Doug Wilson to a certain degree, even though Doug's
yeah,
got a nuanced view. But certainly those three ministries, in terms of where my focus is on post millennialism and theonomy and things like that. And I don't know any of those people. I really don't. I actually kind of know Joel Webbon a little bit, so it's kind of a strange position for me to be in, to be honest.
mhm. Yeah. No, I mean, likewise, you know what I mean. Like, and this one could say this all started with the Tobias Schneider Joel Webbon debate, and so people pick sides. Let's assume for a moment. I'm not saying this, but let's assume for a moment that between Tobias and Joel, the conflict that they had, I say, well, I see it Joel's way, right? Even if that were true, We've moved past just who disrespected who and who said what about who, um, and just simply a deeper conversation about how do we make Christian nations. And when it comes to that question, well, the answer that Joel's giving and the answer that the Apologia and Ezra Institute guys are giving, and like you said, to a lesser but somewhat of an extent, Moscow, I would say, yeah, those guys are in the right. We don't do this the way that Joel and Stephen Wolf and all these other guys are saying that we should. I'm glad that they see the problem, right? They do see the problem. There is a trash world. Good. You guys notice it. Beautiful. What do we do about it? Well, I think as Christians, we have to think biblically about these things. So without further ado, let's actually look at this video because it does relate to defeating trash world, right? Like part of the issue, and I think you and I would agree with this, part of the issue is illegal immigration, right? And a lack of assimilation from immigrants in the United States. Like that's a huge problem. A lot of people are not assimilating. A lot of people are here illegally. And so can they even be Americans, right? Like that's the question. So I think that's what Joel's trying to answer here. I'm going to go ahead and pull the video up. Let me see if this works like this. And let's just listen into what he has to say.
Real quick, before I turn to Michael, I want to address this comment in the chat because my heart goes out to you. And there are many people in the same similar situation as you. I have people in our church that fit this description. And I want you to know that I love you. I am glad you're here. And I want to deal with our listeners, our followers, with honesty and integrity. I feel like a lot of pastors will use they'll just gloss over things. And so I want to deal with this honestly. So Ninja 5150 says this: Joel, I know I'm probably the exception, but I'm a first generation immigrant from Mexico, and I am as patriotic as they come. My two sons, born in the USA, served our country honorably, and we love the USA. So Ninja 5150, first, I'm assuming you're listening to this because you're a Christian. So first, you're my brother in Christ. I love you immensely. Number two, from the little bit that I can tell from this comment, you're the type of person that I can genuinely say from the bottom of my heart, I'm glad you're here. I'm grateful for your sons and their service. And so here's my position. If I had my way, you would be here, but you would not be a citizen. Your sons would not be citizens. Your grandchildren would.
Okay. So I'm going to stop it there for just a moment. I don't know about you, but I'm not trying to take anything away from Joel. But it almost seems like he's just sort of trying to soften the blow that he's about to give by saying, listen, we love you and I'm glad you're here and you're my brother in Christ. But I think he's just trying to soften the blow. I don't know how fully genuine that might be. I mean, he might be very genuine. But at the end of the day, I think he's looking at this guy, Ninja something. He's saying at the end of the day, you're a Mexican. And, I don't really want you in my country. Somebody might look at that and say, well, how did you get that? Well, if you keep watching the video, you kind of get that impression as well. What's really fascinating to me is that, okay, let's say that you make the case that a first generation like this guy wouldn't really be able to become an American for whatever reason. What's really, really fascinating to me is that he makes the argument that his children who grew up here, were born here, and served in the military also cannot be Americans. That's what blew my mind. I don't know if that you noticed that as well, or did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have thoughts on it. Wow, that was a lot there. It's interesting even how he begins the whole response. He says, there are people who are in your situation, like he was struggling with some type of sin or some type of difficult life decision that he had to make. It doesn't sound like that's what he is. It sounds like the man is a citizen, a naturalized citizen, and probably his two sons are citizens too. I don't know. That's my guess. At least they would be citizens just naturally, just by being born here. So I'm not sure what situation he means or he's referring to. Is he talking about the fact that he, in his mind, has this hypothetical ideal that he wants to be the basis for naturalization and immigration in the United States, and he's putting these people in that situation? That, with even the beginning, the way he words it was a little bit unusual, to say the least. He could have just said, this is an excellent question. They're not in any kind of bad situation. They are Americans if they are citizens here. So that was a little bizarre just at the get-go. The biggest thing that stood out for me, though, in this entire talk that he has here, is those two children were in the military.
Yeah. That's
so. I mean, you could make the case, well, Pastor Webbon, I really love you. I believe you're a brother in the Lord. I want to submit to you as a pastor, but I wouldn't want you to be an American because you didn't serve in the military. Because technically speaking, if you go back and you look at the anti-suffragist argumentation, one of the reasons that they argued against women having the right to vote and being citizens is because they would never be able to enforce their rights or their privileges. And as far as I know, I mean, I could be wrong. Pastor Webbon is not in the armed services. So you could make a case. It wouldn't be the worst argument in the world that the vote and citizenship should be restricted to individuals who serve in the military. Because why? Same argument that the anti-suffragists use, because they're the only ones who can enforce those rights. And since we're sitting in air-conditioned offices in our job, doing our jobs, while they're going overseas in deserts and getting bullets shot at them, they should have a privilege that we do not. I thought that was the most interesting part. He wants people who were native-born Americans who served in the armed forces to defend his right to vote to not be American citizens. I thought that was the most striking part of that whole exchange.
And I wonder if he would say, well, if I had it my way, because he talked about, if I had it my way, you guys wouldn't be citizens. I'm wondering if he's including into that, you also wouldn't have served in the military.
Yeah,
right?
I was thinking that as well, because that would be an interesting question. Does he not want people who are second generation immigrants to be allowed to serve in the American armed forces?
Yeah.
Because I can't think of a good reason why they would be denied citizenship if they served in the armed forces. I just can't think of one. Because,
well, how about this one, right? Sure. Well, they're foreign mercenaries, right? So I mean, I'm not saying that that's what I believe. I'm just saying maybe in his mind, he's like, well, that's nothing more than a foreign mercenary, right?
But okay, if they were born in another country, sure, that could definitely be the case. They weren't. The kids aren't born in Mexico, were they? They were born here, right?
I mean, yeah, that's what the guy seems to indicate.
Yeah, sure. If I came over here and I joined the military and they said that you're a foreign mercenary, I could see that argument. But even if you're native born, they would still see them as foreign mercenaries. That would be interesting, at least as an argument.
Well, and that's what brings up the question of citizenship, right? Like, if he's not willing to give them citizenship, doesn't that mean that he sees them as somehow foreign?
Well, I'm trying to be as charitable as I can to him, because I've heard him say that George Washington and Booker T. Washington are the same ethnicity. Now,
yeah.
I'm not really sure if that's true, but so I don't know if someone was like, let's say, a descendant of somebody who was a Chinese immigrant in the 19th century, and they were here for however many generations that is, or someone who's a descendant of Black African slaves, at least they're probably like 10 generations, right? I don't necessarily see if he would see those as issues. So I don't know if this is an I don't know if this is a skin color issue. Maybe it's just a national issue, like Frenchmen, Englishmen, they would be treated the same way. If that's the case, then I think it's more of a nationalist position rather than a killing position. Yeah.
Well, so later in the video, and I don't know if we'll get to this, but he applies the same thing to like Canadians, right? So I agree with you. I don't think it's a skin color issue, but the problem with that, I think, is if it's not a skin color issue, and it's an ideology issue, then who determines who has what ideology, right? Like, if you say, well, you have to embrace American values and this and that, and you have to have a land and a lineage or a connection to the land and its lineage. I mean, that's double speak, right? You, if you have a connection by, let's put it this way, blood and soil or land and lineage,
Particular
um,
people, particular place. That's the phrase that you like.
right? A particular people in a particular place. Then and that is, I mean, I would say that there is a correlation with what it means to be a Frenchman or an American or something like that. Uh, there is a correlation with that, right? Normatively, in most circumstances, people who are true Americans will also happen to have a connection to the land, historically, and a lineage. But I don't think that that would be true without exception, because the primary, and especially for a place like the United States of America, right? I've seen comparisons to, like, well, Japan, these people, they don't want a lot of foreigners and they
Mhm.
want to keep everything Japanese. And okay, should we really be looking to secular nations for the example of what a Christian nation should look like with Christian ideals? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what doesn't make sense to me. So Joel wants to establish a Christian nation with Christian values, and then he says, and we got to look at Japan as the model for what we ought to do in terms of citizenship and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some value there, but we can't make a side by side comparison, because if you were to take that approach, now we say, well, you're just a nationalist that with some Christianity sprinkled on it. But the nature of Christianity is one of adoption. You know what I'm saying? And Joel himself is adopted. So what does
Yeah.
that mean for him? Like,
So
okay,
this is
maybe
always my question with this entire situation, because this is not really a hill for me to die on. Third generation based upon, because he didn't really ground it there. I think he mentions it in some other video. There must be something out there that's has an extensive discussion on applying Deuteronomy 23 or Aristotle, whoever, to this particular third generation standard. But he distinguishes between covenant membership in the church and national citizenship. So, as an elder of a church, he can see someone who's whatever ethnicity, Mexican, Japanese, and if they make a credible confession of faith in Jesus Christ, and I don't know what their standard is, maybe like examining them for a year to make sure that they come regularly. If they do that, he accepts them and admits them to the Lord's table. However, for somebody who's foreign born, he has higher standards, it seems. So,
like in church standards.
no, in terms of citizenship for a
Gotcha.
nation,
Okay.
he has higher standards. So, I think there was an entire video that they did where they discussed some of the comments that Reagan and Vivek Ramaswamy had made about, well, you can come here and you can be an American if you believe, like you said, the ideology of America. But he's saying, no, that's not good enough. You have to have land and lineage, whatever phrase you want to use, blood and soil. You have to have that additional component. What would be the reason for that? Because I'm thinking the reasons that they don't want somebody who's, in this case, somebody who came from Mexico, as well as his children who were born here, I assume, to be American citizens is because they'll have ties to their previous culture.
Mm-hmm.
But you have ties to your former life as a Christian. You had probably a sinful life that you lived. You were in rebellion against God. Now the Spirit has worked in your heart. So you're confessing faith in Jesus and making vows to become a member in good standing at a church such as his. Why is that good enough? But making a vow that you're going to be honoring the United States, that this is your land, this is your nation now. You forego any loyalties that you had towards your previous land, in this case, I guess, Mexico, which what this gentleman appears to have done.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that not good enough? Why he's like, if it was up to me, no, it would be your grandchildren. I'm trying to get my head around that.
Yeah. And even if, because you could argue, well, he's he's too far into Mexican culture, right? It's just too ingrained in him at this point. He's just not going to be able to fully assimilate in his lifetime. But why not the second generation, like the born and raised kids? That is wild to me. I mean,
But
that just absolutely makes no
you
sense to
could,
me.
okay, you could be assimilated into witchcraft or Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam and then convert to Christianity. Would that be a reason to say, oh, we can't allow this person to come to the table, we can't allow him to become a member at our church? They would never do that.
Sure.
So what if they say no? My culture is not ingrained in me. What if they came from a situation where they lived in a nation that was extremely hostile to the Christian faith,
Yeah,
and they were
absolutely.
extremely thankful? Because I know in this video we're not going to play the whole thing, but he says, "Well, I'm tired of making exceptions. Exceptions. I don't
Yeah,
want any exceptions."
he does
But
bring that up.
he has to make exceptions as a minister because the majority of people in India are not Christian. There's the super majority really is Hindu, but then a large minority is Islamic, and a small minority is Christian. Yet, if an Indian person came into his church, and like I said, he was able to examine them, make sure that they were sincere, that they weren't just there for a couple of weeks or whatever, and eventually they would become members at his church with full membership rights. So he would make an exception in that case. So why would you make an exception in that case? It seems like the standard for being an American citizen for him is higher than being a Christian at his church.
Yeah, and it just seems like a generalization. Like, well, these kind of people, they'll never be able to assimilate, right? But that just seems like a very, very subjective judgment. But I'm thinking about like when Jesus was being judged, right, by the Jews, like in John 7, and they're kind of wondering who he is, where he came from, can he really be a prophet, can he really be a good man, blah blah blah. And so, um, he's given them all these lessons. Um, he's talking about their hypocrisy and this and that. And so in First John, or I'm sorry, in John chapter 7, verse 24, the way that he finishes is he says to them, "Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." And so, if you take that principle and you say, well, we can't generalize something about a person based on where they're from, right? Because that was one of the things, like, can anything good come from Galilee? Because they're saying, well, the Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem, but he grew up in Nazareth, which was in Galilee, and so they're judging based on where he is from. That's not the only problem, right? But that is part of the issue that they're having. Jesus says, "Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment." And so, what are we talking about here? Like, if we're going to be a Christian nation, should we not then have Christian principles, and even who is going to be a part of this nation, or are we just going to generalize?
Well, you see, Jay, after a person is regenerate, they don't cease to be Puerto Rican or Mexican. Don't you
Oh,
know that?
sure,
When they
absolutely,
left
yeah.
over,
But
they
I
have a
know you're making fun of it. I know,
well, they have a
but
form of dualism, in my view, and Dr. Joe Buddha has also pointed this out. They split the human being in half, and that's why I have issues with this type of thinking, because man can't be split in half like that the way they do, and that's where they end up with your spiritual kingdom, the kingdom of Christ, and your common kingdom, the kingdom
yeah,
of
yeah,
man, the realm. So you're two different people in two different places, and Stephen Wolfe in his book says, well, there's the church and the people of God. I have no idea how that can be defended theologically. That is, and he doesn't try to anyway, but that is like unbiblical.
yeah,
The church, you don't cease to be a Christian into some other sphere when you go out there as if you're not still a member of the church. But I think that's one of the problems of the two kingdom model. They reject sphere sovereignty. They reject the concept of structure. And I think you're seeing that in what Joel's saying here, that there are certain aspects of the individual, such as his Mexican heritage or his Mexican nationality, which he does not believe can be overcome, even if the person loves the United States of America, even if the person is a godly man, is a believer in Jesus Christ, likes his ministry. No, if it was up to him, his grandchildren would be citizens, not him or his children.
Yeah, that's. I think that's a good way to lead into the next portion of this. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to the video, and we'll keep listening in.
And you would be treated fairly, as just like the general equity, the application of the civil codes to Israel, the oppressed or extorted or taken advantage of, you would be treated fairly. You would be able to have fair wages. There would be less people that are able to fit into this category, less legal immigration on the whole, year by year, substantially less. But people like you, Ninja 5150, there would be cases exactly like you, and you would always be my brother in Christ, whether you immigrated here or not, simply by our union with Christ by the Spirit and through faith. You furthermore would be not my fellow citizen, but in a looser sense, a fellow countryman who lives here. So, you would be my neighbor, and my particular neighbor in a geographic, literal sense, living in my country. I would care for you, your wife, your children, your grandchildren, and want to see your best. And yet there would still be multiple categories and not just a one-size-fits-all. You would be a part of our country, but you would be a sojourner. But a sojourner who, like Ruth, wants to bind herself to Israel. Your God will be my God, your people will be my people, and your grandchildren would eventually be citizens and voting in our national elections and all these kinds of things.
All right. Pause there for a second, because he seems to be creating this this weird category of like, you be my countryman in some sense, and we take care of you, but you can't be a citizen. I'm wondering, how do you take care of somebody who you say is my countryman in some sense, but cannot be a citizen? Number one. And number two, that comparison to Ruth, where he says, yeah, she, like Ruth, your grandchildren would be citizens. I'm just like, whoa. Ruth did not have to wait until her grandchildren were citizens. I don't know where he got that from. Like, Ruth says, I mean, he quotes it, your people will be my people, your God, my God, right? Like, she joins the nation of Israel, not just spiritually, but nationally as well. And you don't see any objection whatsoever to that in the text. So I don't know, man. What are you thinking?
Yeah, there's a lack of precision in his language too. There, we talked about this before we aired. He used the phrase sojourner. Well, Ninja 5151, whatever his name as user ID is not a sojourner. He is a legal resident here. So if he's gonna use Thomas Aquinas has three categories for foreigners. He has travelers, he has residents, and he has citizens. And the gentleman that's what we're talking about, or Webbon is talking about, is a resident. It's a person who's living in the land, but doesn't have the full benefits or rights of citizenship, according to him.
It might be a citizen even.
So there's a lack of precision in the language anyway. He's not a sojourner. He's a legal resident. Foreign-born legal resident is a better category to describe him as. It seems that when you are not careful with your language, you're allowed to do these kinds of things. I've just found that. But yeah, he says he has like different categories of how you can live here and still be a countryman, but not be a citizen. So he has different layers, I suppose. There's different rights that certain people will have. I personally, have a much stricter view. First of all, he said something interesting. He said there would be cases like you. But if we were to follow Pastor Webbon's model, land, lineage, loves, language, liturgy, all the others that he has, all of the cases would be like him. Because you would have to be a true Christian to even come to the United States, right? So why would there be certain cases like him? Everybody would be like him. Everybody would be an authentic believer in Jesus Christ. Everybody would be able to speak English fluently in order to enter here. Everybody would have to love the United States. Everybody would have to, have fidelity to this land and not their foreign land. So I don't understand like, what does he mean when he says there would be cases like you? If the immigration policy changed, so it'd be according to Pastor Joel Webbon's standard. That also threw me off a little bit there. Unless he has a more open immigration policy where we allow Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists and atheists and others to come in. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I understand, right? Like Ruth's heart really was for Israel. And so I think the question is, when we let people in here, is their heart really for the United States of America? Right? Like that's the question. And I think there are ways to test that. But to say, well, first generation and even second generation, we're not even going to give you a chance to prove it. I don't know, man. That doesn't line up with with the parallel that he makes with Ruth at all. It's just wild, dude.
No, I agree with you. And wouldn't Ruth's child Obed have been a half Moabite?
Yes,
She would have
correct.
been a Moabite. I think Boaz was Hebrew.
Boaz. Yes, he was.
Boaz
He
was
was Hebrew.
Hebrew. Ruth was a Moabite. So you have Obed, who is half Jewish or half Hebrew and half Moabite, and that's the grandfather of the king of Judah or the king of Israel, really the United Kingdom. So, I mean, aren't the Moabites restricted from being citizens from his perspective? It really says the sanctuary of God.
Well, here,
it's in generations.
here's the funny thing, right? Like I think about like Uriah the Hittite, who seems to be like the good guy of the story when he comes along, right? Like, he's serving in the Israelite army, or yeah, Israelite army. Excuse me, I don't know what I was thinking. He's serving in that army, and the Bible doesn't really say like, oh yeah, he was an Israelite. You know, it just describes him as a Hittite. But if you going back to the earlier argument of like, well, your children wouldn't be citizens. I think there might be an implication there that they wouldn't have served in the military either.
Yeah,
Well,
I think so. I think if he was consistent at that point, I think it would. He didn't mention it though. He didn't say I wouldn't want your children to serve in the military. Maybe it would be a case where he would be like, well, they'd be foreign mercenaries anyway. It could be, but he didn't flesh it out. So I don't want to respond to something he didn't say or give him.
Sure,
But he wouldn't want them to be citizens, even if they served in the military or not. He didn't qualify it.
Right, but how do you? I mean, okay. So you wouldn't vote, right? What else would you be prohibited from doing? Is what I want to know.
Well, you know, this gets really complicated really fast because we live in the United States, where we have the 10th Amendment. All of those things that are not specified in the Constitution go to the states. So I don't know if you're familiar with voting rights, but women were able to vote in local elections and other things before the 19th Amendment.
That's interesting. I actually did not know that.
Yeah. So I don't know. Does he mean the national vote? It would be nice to see if he would clarify that. Does he mean that maybe these second and third generation or first and second generation immigrants would be allowed to vote in local elections or local things, but just not the national vote? Because there's no real specificity in what he said there. I don't want to criticize something he didn't say, but there's ways to. But he also said that they would be his fellow countrymen, and he does want. In another video, he said he wanted certain people who immigrate here to have certain rights. So maybe he meant being able to vote in a local or state election. I'm not sure.
I just, I made a meme because I had to make a meme out of this. When I first heard this, I was like, this is absurd. Like this is absolutely absurd. And so I was like thinking like guys like Antifa, right? Like years ago, those guys are still around. And, a lot of those guys are like 10th generation, 15th generation Americans.
Yeah.
And then you have, do you know Kofi Bowen? I think that's how you pronounce his name.
I think so, yeah. The one that Corey Muller went after.
Actually, yes, correct. Corey Muller did go after him. But I've met Kofi. He's been on my show. We've met in Orlando and things like that. And, theologically, Kofi and I would be very different. in a lot of secondary things that are still important, right? But secondary things. But Kofi, in terms of, first of all, as a Christian brother, yeah, we align up perfectly, right? But also, he's to me, he's an American, and he's got a British accent. I just, everything that he believes, all of his values, all of his, just everything, he's American. And I just think to myself, I'm like, well, wait a minute. So he can't be, because he's first generation, I guess, British, Ghanan. His family's from Ghana. He grew up in the UK. And now he's married to an American woman, I believe, living here in Washington, or Oregon, I think, excuse me. And, everything that he believes, everything that he stands for, not just as a Christian, but just as an American. You know what I mean? And so I made a meme making fun of Joel's take, honestly. But it was grounded in truth. I'm like, how are you going to tell me that these guys who hate America, who don't agree with its values, who don't have a job, who probably smell bad because they don't shower, like just all these terrible qualities, but they're 10th generation Americans, so they're a true American. But Kofi, who believes in everything you believe as a Christian and as an American, no, he can't be an American. I mean,
well,
what?
Jay, I'm tired of making exceptions. Doesn't he answer that later on in the video? I don't know if we're going to show that clip, but I don't know if you know, I'm a seventh. I think I'm a seventh, at least a fifth, but probably a seventh generation Presbyterian. So if anybody is Anglo-Protestant, it would be me. When my uncle and my father were in India, they were reading Bram Stoker's Dracula and Perry Mason and James Bond. And my uncle talked about how amazing America was and how much better than India America was in India. Okay. So when we came here, it wasn't that huge of a transition. My grandfather actually taught English schools in India. So we fit in very well in the United States of America. First of all, we were already Christian. Not only were we Christian, we were Presbyterian. And we spoke the language, and we understood. There were some cultural differences. Sure, there was some cultural differences when we first came here. But it wasn't as daunting a challenge as he seems to think, at least. But again, he doesn't want exceptions. So I don't really know what it would take to convince him to make it. Yeah.
Is Joel a true Texan?
I think he's from Texas, isn't he?
I don't know. Was he a true Californian when he lived there?
I'm sure he probably thought of himself as a Texan.
Okay, fair enough. That's fine.
I don't know. I don't want to say stuff because I don't want to read his mind. But I'm guessing, considering.
I mean, yeah, I would not want to affiliate with California. No, no offense, man. I know you live there, but sorry.
No offense taken.
It's not you, man.
No, I mean, it used to be a good state once upon a time.
Very, very long time ago. Yeah. That is long lost to the annals of history.
It has been.
But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you want to comment here, or should we keep going?
Let's move on.
All right, let's do it. Alrighty, here we go.
You yourself would not be able to achieve in your lifetime, for yourself personally, that level of assimilation. But you would be loved, you would be appreciated, there would be no animosity towards you, you would be treated with fairness, and you and other Christians like you who immigrated, it would be less amount for sure. For sure. Millions have to go back.
Okay.
I don't get so millions have to go back. So
are we talking about illegals?
I don't know.
Because if we're talking about illegals, I'm all for that.
I don't know why he said there will be cases like you when he says Christians like you here.
I see that. That's
all of the cases, unless there's Christians who come over here who hate America. Maybe that's what he's thinking of. I'm not sure.
Sure.
Again, there's a lack of precision in his language, so it's hard for me to criticize him.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what he means and what he's saying. But I don't know if he meant illegal immigrants, to be honest with you, Jay. Did he mean legal immigrants have to go back? Does he mean
Well, so that's the part that was kind of weird, right? When he says that, I'm like, I'm hoping, I think he's talking about illegals, but at the
well,
same
what
time, he's
conservative is
kind
going to
of
disagree with that?
say that again. I'm sorry.
What even conservative is going to disagree with that? That's not a controversial statement.
Well, you'd be surprised. There are some conservatives that would say, "Well, no, we can't just send millions back." I mean, I've met them,
Are
but
you talking about
usually
illegal immigrants? They don't want to send illegal immigrants back.
they don't. They think it's a case by case basis. I'm talking about
Right,
like
right, but
conservatives, but I don't think I don't think
legal,
it's that complicated. I'm like, if you're here illegally, you're breaking the law.
right, but like, okay, they've broken the law, so then I don't think would conservatives say no, even though they broke the law, they should stay here? Are you saying that there's conservatives like that?
There are some that yes, I've spoken to. I'm not saying they're the majority, but there are some that
Well, I'm
would
not really sure they'd be conservative then, right? They'd be more like moderates.
I guess in that particular subject, yeah, they would be more moderate. But then again, you know what? Conservatives, a lot of conservatives also are pro LGBTQ.
Sure, let me.
Uh,
Well, how we know that the majority of people who voted for Trump, they were pretty positive about that immigration stance. I think they just wanted it like gradual, where they wanted it the criminals first, and then we'll go to the next tier, and so on and so forth. But I don't think that would be as controversial. But I don't think is that what he's saying? Because if that's what he's saying, and then maybe there's some conservatives, like you mentioned, that disagree with that. They don't want people who are here illegally to have to go back to their native country. Then I would agree with Joel Webbon on that, if that's what he means.
absolutely,
Yeah. If he's pushing back against conservatives who believe we shouldn't enforce immigration laws here, of course we would agree with Pastor Webbon. But is that what he means? Millions have to go back?
I don't know.
The majority of immigrants who live in the United States are not illegal. The majority of immigrants in the United States are legal. So,
Well, we've had this issue with the border and just thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands. I don't know if it's even hundreds of thousands. I mean, even what was it, like 6 months ago, 8 months ago, something like that? The Texas governor essentially said to the National Guard, "Hey, take over the border because the federal government's not doing its job." And so I've heard the word millions thrown around when it comes to illegals.
no, yeah, there's no question about
And
that.
so,
A lot of illegal immigrants are here because of, I think the majority actually might be because of expired visas and things like that. But again, that's not something we would disagree with Pastor Webbon on, if that's what he meant. Millions have to go back. But I'm just trying to get inside his head, because he's like, if I could have my way, this is my ideal political system. These are my ideal immigration laws. Would he want people who came here legally but have Islamic affiliation or Hindu affiliation or Buddhist or atheist affiliation to be sent back on that basis? Because even then, I'm not really sure I necessarily disagree with that either.
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. This might be a controversial opinion, but yeah, I don't think so. Maybe there would be some exceptions. I would have to look at them from a biblical standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're talking about, you want a Christian nation.
Yeah.
Assuming, obviously not everybody's going to be Christian. You can't change the heart. You can't do that, right? But there has to be at least some appreciation, some connection, some profession of faith, right? If you want to be part of what is supposed to be a Christian nation.
I mean, like, there are people who are gung-ho, true blue, Jack Bauer, Americana, Alex Jones. And then there's just people who are just like, yeah, I live here, it's cool, I'm American. They kind of just go with the flow.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, like, and that's the same thing with the church, right? There's nominal Christians in the church. They go to the Sunday, they just go through the motions, and they're not really serious-minded about the faith, but you would still consider them part of the body. So,
and those people could be the mission field here for those who live here.
yeah.
You know
So
what I
I
mean?
don't really know about this whole, well, you just have to be so sold out on America. It almost becomes like a religion at that point, in a sense. Just be like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a patriot. I'm loyal to America. I will fight against all four enemies, foreign and domestic. Support us. But
So
yeah, go ahead.
here's the question, right? And maybe you can answer this.
Sure.
What if there is no America in 10 years? Like where do your loyalties lie at that point?
I mean, there. I'm sure there's people across the world who are nationless, right? There's probably people who been banished from a certain country, asked to never return, and they're not really citizens in any particular land. Displaced people, I suppose. Um, I don't know. I think that's a good question. Um, Maybe we should point out like where we think maybe Joel Webbon is coming from here in arriving at his conclusions. To me, it sounds like he's not really a theonomist anymore, in at least the old Reconstructionist sense of the word, but he's more of a natural law to kingdom guy.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's defining what he would think is a Christian nation. And it's not so much scripture alone, but scripture plus natural law. And I think that's why he's drawing the conclusions that he draws, not on this subject in particular, which I'm not a crusader about this particular topic or anything. Other areas, though, where he has commented about Indian people, about Haitians, about the Jewish people, the Crusades, those are a little bit more troubling and concerning to me.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine, uh, Bill Clark or Willem Clark, on a show recently. I think we did it like 2 weeks ago, and he studied these kinds of things, right? Like the IQ based on
Yeah,
ethnicity and stuff like that. So what he was telling me is that you can have, for example, Asians, right? East Asians. He was saying you can have a larger than normal amount of people with extremely high IQs. That can
mhm,
happen. He says that's true. But what happens is that nevertheless, the great majority of, say, Asians or Africans or whatever else might be, um, will land right around 90 to 100. I think he
yeah,
was saying, and so he was saying, and this is true across the board, across ethnicity. And so he says, when people say that Haitians have an average IQ of 70 or something like that, he's like, well, they're not telling the whole story. They're being disingenuous
yeah.
because
I saw that
the
episode. It was awesome.
yeah, he was saying like you might have. He says you might have more than average. He says I don't know. You might have above average numbers of IQs around 70 in Haitians, but the overall IQ of Haitians, the majority of Haitians are going to land in the 90 to 100 range, just like everybody else.
Yeah,
Right. And he was talking about how it's the same thing in sports, right? Like African Americans in sports, you might have some African Americans with above average numbers of high twitch muscle fibers that allow them to run, jump higher than most people. But still,
yeah,
when you take the majority of African Americans,
yeah,
they have just as many fast twitch muscle fibers as a white guy or an Asian guy or whatever it might be. And so he's like, those numbers, they're not telling the whole story.
yeah.
And people that want these kinist type ideas or whatever, they'll hold on to like these exceptions, these prominent exceptions in a particular race or ethnicity, and say, you see, they're different from us. When in reality, he's like, no, it's not that different.
He pointed the same thing out with strength training. He's saying if you work out, you'll be muscular because most of us have normal, average body types.
Oh,
And so
you watched it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
heard it.
I saw that episode. I
Oh,
loved it.
perfect.
So he made a number of applications like that. Yeah, I was talking to a kinist on Twitter, and I said to him, I said that Joel Webbon had said that he believes that Booker T. Washington and George Washington are the same ethnicity. He's like, I disagree with Joel Webbon on
Well,
that.
yeah.
So um, there is an extreme faction out there that's a little bit more, how should I say it, white ethnocentric than even past. Because I want to be charitable to Pastor Webbon here. I've tried to listen to him. I used to listen to him really extensively.
Yeah, likewise.
I've just been concerned, and this is one video that raises concern as well. But some of the comments that he's made about Indian people, where he talked about how if we allow 1 billion Indian people here, you won't get 1 billion Vivek Ramaswamis. You'll get 1 billion people pooping on the street, or Indian people like to eat cow dung and things like that. And I don't know if he's being hyperbolic or anything like that, but I'm thinking, if I knew an Indian person who was a recent convert to Christianity, I don't think I would recommend Right Response Ministries to them. Or yeah, or maybe even maybe a Muslim who's a recent convert. Some of the stuff that's been said about the Crusades, I'm not sure I would recommend Right Response Ministries and that particular group to them. I think I would recommend somebody else.
Yeah, no, they'd be pretty weirded out, to say the least. What is this? Like, who am I talking to?
Yeah,
I'm not gonna take any more advice from you, dude. Yeah. Okay, so listen, let's go ahead.
Or did we watch the whole thing?
I'm sorry?
Is there another clip?
Yeah, I want to jump over to I think it's around 7 minutes.
Oh, is it towards the end? Okay.
Yeah, because again, we're already an hour into this
today, so I don't expect her.
Can't do the whole thing, but this next part. Let me see right here. This next part is actually quite interesting. I think we might be a little bit more on the same page.
It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting. And this, I speak Spanish, so this applies to me in a particular way. I have my thoughts, so let's hear Joel out.
Outside of myself and with our nation as a whole, I am going to advocate that immigration, illegal immigration, is immediately stopped. Legal immigration is drastically mitigated. And then for those who are able to legally immigrate, I want them to be Christian. I want them to love America and love our heritage. I want them to fully assimilate. I would like to see people stop speaking Spanish.
Pausing it right there just makes it very, very funny.
Why do you have to stop speaking Spanish, though?
Well, okay, so
I have to stop speaking Gujarati with my family, my mom sometimes.
Maybe.
I usually speak to her in English. Once my brother speaks to her in Gujarati, so I guess we should stop doing that. I think he means in public. We shouldn't have
yes
or things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe. I hope he doesn't mean just drop all languages except English. I really don't think that he would. I mean, how does that even work for example, I want to be a diplomat when I grow up, right? If you're a teenager or something, you kind of have to learn a language.
Most people in the world speak more than one language.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But even people here, you say, okay, let's assume for a second the worst, right? Let's assume the worst. And he says, no, Americans will not speak any other language other than English at all times. Listen, first and foremost, I will agree that everybody here should be speaking English. That is the common tongue in this country. And if you're going to be here, you need to learn it. I'm sorry, but and I say this as somebody that goes to a church where some people don't want to learn English. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, then you shouldn't be here if you're not willing to learn the language. You just should not be here if you're not willing to learn the language. You have to learn the language. You have to make an effort. I don't think that's correct because you are a guest and you're trying to become part of the family. Well, the family here in the United States of America speaks English. Now, that said, Americans have historically spoken other languages as well. I brought them up, right? The Appalachians speak some kind of Appalachian English dialect. You have the Cajuns who speak French, right? Who are descendants of Frenchmen before the Louisiana Purchase. And you even have Americans who are descendants of Mexicans, before the Mexican-American War and things like that, who lived for generations in New Mexico and Arizona and California and things of that nature, who were speaking Spanish, of all things. So there is a tie of these languages into American history, even if it's not the majority. But there is a historic tie between the language and the land. There just is. So to make the case that, and again, I'm not saying that he is, but let's assume for a second that he is. To make the case that you can only speak English in the United States, that would be absurd. But I do agree with you. I think what he's talking about is speaking Spanish in public, which I do agree with that. Like if I'm in front of people that can't understand me, I think it would be highly disrespectful of me to be speaking in another language that they cannot understand, especially if it's not the predominant language of the country. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you're talking to somebody who tutored English for close to a decade. So yeah, I mean, there's no disagreement from us if he's saying that the official language of the United States should be the English language. It has been the English language. Everybody in the country who lives here legally should learn that language. They should be fluent in it. Although looking at some of the papers that I saw when I was a tutor, I was like, well, some of these kids don't even know how to speak English, let alone trying to learn a second language. But no, there's no disagreement with us here. He's preaching to the choir if he's saying English is a necessity to be an American. Of course, that's absolutely positively true. But at the same time, an educated populace speaks more than one language. We should be able to have Americans compete with the rest of the world and speak at least a couple of languages, at least. It doesn't have to be a particular language. It could be French. It was a thing in school when most people who have like 1, 2, 3, 4 years, they can't speak a lick of it after they get out of school. But that should be something that we should start considering, just so that we have. If you speak multiple languages, it's just more educated populace. Be a populace that you could teach logic to again too, and rhetoric. We should try to get back to some of those things. But no, I don't think we disagree with him in this particular segment. I mean, maybe he could he could have verbalized it a little bit different than we're gonna see the rest of it.
We're gonna hear the rest of it. I don't think it clear, at least from this portion, you don't get much further clarification. You know, there is one thing though that he says that I'm like, well, that's a bit of a contradiction, because right before he says I'd like for people to stop speaking Spanish, he says that those people are coming in here, you know, we want to welcome them and we want them to like be here and assimilate and embrace the culture and this and that. I'm like, well, Joel, some of them are trying, but you're saying, but you can't be a citizen. So which one is it?
The ones that speak English fluently, I don't want you to be a citizen.
Man. You know, like, and listen, you know, this is I have an issue here, because I don't know if you know this. The test to become an American citizen, did you know that they offer it in Spanish and Creole and a couple other languages, which to me is wild. I'm like, really?
I mean, we're living in a country right now where they're saying a boy can be a girl, so it doesn't surprise me that we have.
Yeah, no, I don't understand that. Like, I think that there can be exceptions for, like, for example, you move here from India, right? And you pass the exam, you become an American citizen, you took it in English, and you want to bring over your ailing mother. Okay. You know, she doesn't need to learn English. She's just here to be taken care of by you, right? Okay. I don't see a problem there. But even then, if she
take care of her, and then the taxpayers don't have to take care of her, sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that in just a second, because they're about to talk about welfare. But even then, you know, I wonder, okay, well, maybe for her, citizenship isn't really a necessity. She doesn't need to come here and vote. She's just here for you to take care of her. So I don't know. I haven't thought that one through, but maybe there could be some exceptions, right? I know Joel doesn't want to think about the exceptions, but I think that it's inevitable. You have to think about the exceptions, right? You can't just.
I think he's said he's tired of it or something now. We don't want to have that segment of the video, so I didn't watch it. It was something down the lines that he's tired of making exceptions. You
can't make cookie cutter systems for people, is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, the system that he wants, where you have to be a Christian You have to speak English fluently. You have to love the United States. I don't see a good reason why those people can't be citizens, besides the fact that they don't serve in the military, which would be an enforcement, which would give people who serve in the military a special privilege that we don't have, which they should have, in my opinion.
Sure.
Excluding that, if they do all of those things, he still doesn't want them to be citizens, because like you said, I think the roots are too deep, whether they be from Mexico or Madagascar, Saudi Arabia, or wherever they're coming from. From his perspective, those roots are in their psyche a little too deep, and therefore he doesn't trust it until the third generation. That's the best I could gather from what he said. He didn't verbalize it. He didn't articulate it.
That's what I get too. But again, there's flawed logic there. Again, from a reason standpoint, and more importantly, from a biblical standpoint, that just doesn't line up. Again, you want a Christian nation, you want Christian principles. You can't, the whole idea of Christianity is, especially for those who are Gentiles, is that we can embrace somebody who is according to the flesh, right? According to their place of origin, according to whatever you want to call it, they are different from us, and they can actually line up with us and agree with us in what is most important, what is essential, what unites us.
I don't
think it's just in faith. But go ahead.
I think the difference is the fact that he is more so a two kingdom person, and we think more in terms of spheres. Because if you're going to take the word of a brother in Christ, like I take your word that your public profession of faith is authentic, why would I not take it? Let's just say you were foreign born, right? Let's say you were born in Canada or something. You came here. Why would I not take your word that you're going to be loyal to the United States? It just seems like a little, especially if we're talking about a Christian nation.
Why would you take my word?
Why wouldn't I take your word for it? If I take your word that you believe in Jesus and that you're an authentic believer in Christ, since I can't read into your heart outside of what I can, manifest external works. If you're out drug dealing, okay, yeah, then maybe there's some issues there or something like that. But if there's no evidence of that, I just see you externally being a pious person, and you verbalize that you believe in Jesus and you don't teach any heresy in your dialogues and things like that. Why would I not take your word that when you say that I love America and I want to be a true American and my loyalty is to this country, it's not to Canada? Why?
Sure. You know what? I agree with that. But you know what? Maybe this is more of the Baptist in me. But I do think you gotta prove it. But I would say the same thing for saying that you're a Christian. Now I'm not saying that, like, for example, I wouldn't be a Baptist. I'm not the type of Baptist that would say, well, let's take a year and see if you've truly converted before we baptize you. Like that to me is just absurd. Like, I don't think that's what it is. I think you sit down with the person, you have a conversation, maybe a conversion, just like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. You have a conversation, and hey, if you believe with all of your heart, you can be baptized. Now, joining a nation is not the same thing as joining the church, right? So for those out there that are saying that I'm about to mix church and state, that's not what I'm saying. But I think that we can take principles on how one joins a family, one joins the church, like there is a Christian principle that can be applied to different spheres, and there are different stipulations depending on the sphere.
Sure, but we're talking about a Christian nation.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
About membership in a Christian church, right? And you make vows at a Christian church. If you join a Christian nation, you make vows to join that Christian nation. If you're a Christian, why would somebody not believe that you're authentic when you say so? Unless they give you reason to, like you come here and you start to, do some kind of like things that are like treason or things like that. But or you start saying I hate America on Twitter or things like that. If nobody has reason to believe that, but all they have is your word and your actions. Let's say we already have rules for how long you have to wait. What is it, 4 years now? I don't remember how long it is before you can become a naturalized.
Yeah, it's something like that. 5 years, you stay here.
You already have a waiting period, so you already have that in effect. We're not saying that you have to wait 4 years to become a member at a church. No, we're not saying that. But we're saying that why would it be prohibited for life? Right? You're just never allowed. Even if you're come here when you're 20 years old and you're 70 years old, you've been loyal to the United States, you know, you've done everything in your power to be a good loyal resident, I guess. You're still denied being an American because you could never be a true American because you don't have blood in the soil here. I don't understand.
You know, here's an idea that I would hypothetically pitch to Joel Webbon, and I'm just wondering what he would think about it. You bring somebody here, and initially you make sure that they check off the basic things. They say they're Christian. They can explain to you basic Christian doctrine. They speak English, or at least are on their way there, right? They can more or less carry conversation. They seem to know a little bit about the United States of America and its principles. Okay. I don't know what he would want to use as the standard for letting people in. Not becoming citizens, but just letting people in. Obviously, we can't let everybody in. We can't let most people in. It's too many people. And I agree with him on that, right?
Well, he did say right there with the clip we just saw, he said they have to be a Christian, they have to speak English, and they have to love America. He did say those three things.
Sure. How do you test that though, right? Like that's what I'm wondering. Like what would be, I guess he could clarify at some point. But let's say you find a way to do a I don't know, a baseline test on that, and you kind of can get an idea. You let the person in, could be 5 years, could be 10 years. I don't know, somewhere in there, hypothetically. In those 5 to 10 years, they are expected to learn more English and assimilate more with their neighbors, their American counterparts, etc. At the end of those 5 to 10 years, they're going to take an exam for citizenship. Part of the exam also requires you to have a couple of witnesses affirming, who, by the way, they have to be American citizen witnesses who have been in the United States for a long time. I don't know. I know that sounds subjective. We can talk about the intricacies later. But they've been here for a while, and they attest to your genuine efforts and success in affiliating or assimilating, excuse me. And you also have to bring a letter from a pastor at a local church saying that you are a member in good standing at that church. If you can provide those witnesses, if you can provide that letter, and if you can pass the test for citizenship in English, what's to stop them from becoming an American? That's what I would like to ask Joel.
I think that he would say that, well, first of all, he would say that it's an exception, which would be interesting in his particular version of America, because he only wants Christians and American loyalists and people who are English fluent to come in. So you would think that all of the cases would be like the one that you just described, or at least the majority of them. I think he would probably give some kind of natural law argument that, well, yeah, the man is regenerate, or woman in this case, like whatever happens to be. They're regenerate. They believe in Jesus Christ. They're my brother or sister in the Lord, but they should not be allowed to become a citizen because the loyalty to the former nation is still somewhat there in them. Or he would say, no, you're right. They should be allowed, but I don't want to make an exception here because it's going to lead to a whole bunch of foreign-born people becoming immigrants, or excuse me, citizens, and they're going to keep voting Democrat, and they're going to keep ruining the nation, et cetera, et cetera.
But what if you put a quota? Not because of anything, but just because you say, well, it's not because we don't want to bring you guys in. Could be to some extent that we don't want to bring you guys in, but it's not simply because of that. It's because we cannot let everybody in. It's not a, if I'm trying to take care of my children that are already here, and I say, hey, honey, let's adopt some kids. We can afford it. Okay, sure, let's adopt. But what if my wife says, by the way, I want to adopt 15 kids? Say, well, that would be wonderful, but we can't. It's just financially, structurally, we cannot do it. I mean, why not that? You see what I'm saying? Like, there's still the limit. Like, if you're going to make the argument, let's see, how did it go? If you're going to make the argument that those people just will never be American, and if they could become American that way, too many of them would. Well, sure. But if you say, but we can't have this many coming in, well, it doesn't matter if many of them could. I think those standards, you know, and again, they are hypothetical. I would need more of a biblical basis. I think that a biblical argument can be made for some of them, but the thing is that it is reality that you can't let everybody in. And I agree with Joel when he talks. He doesn't talk about it in this clip, I don't think. But immigration's a mess right now, and you just can't let any more people in. You got to fix the problem before you start letting more people in. But
Well,
I'm talking about like in the future.
I mean, obviously, if you look at the history of the United States and immigration, you had, the first wave of immigrants, you had the Irish and Germans, then you had a moratorium. Then you had a second wave where you had Eastern Europeans and others come in. Then you had a moratorium. But then in this most recent immigration things, you haven't had that moratorium. I think all of us would be seeking that. But I don't think that's really the issue in this particular video. Like you said, there's a lot that we agree with Joel on. So it's not like this is any kind of Joel Webbon bashing video or anything. We just have questions. And from what we could gather from this brief clip, and the part that we didn't even play, is that he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to make exceptions. That's all I could gather. Maybe he can articulate that argument more clearly someplace, or maybe he has someplace, or maybe he could if we were in conversation with him. But from what we have, that's all I can gather. Am I missing something?
No, I think we're good. Listen, I'm gonna. Are you still good with time?
Sure. We got to
All
finish
right.
this up.
I was hoping to go until about 9 minutes and 15 seconds because
All right.
he says a couple of things there.
Yeah.
But let's see how far we can take it. So let's go ahead and pull it back up.
Sure.
And we'll keep going.
And that nothing is written in any public square, in any public setting. Nothing is written in Spanish.
Okay. I just want to say one quick thing about that.
Sure.
Just one very brief thing about that, and then we'll keep going. I agree with that. Again, the common language is English. But what if you have like a taco stand and you say, hey, I'm selling tacos. Well, taco is a Spanish word, but I don't think there's an English translation for it. Or what if you have the name of a restaurant, since we're going with restaurants, and to show its authenticity in the type of food that it is, it has a Spanish name.
Yeah, I don't think he means that. I don't think he's being that.
No, I mean, maybe I'm just being nitpicky, but
I don't think. I think like if you had like a French restaurant, that had like the la or the
bonjour,
Spanish
du café. I don't know.
Torito would be fine. El Pollo Loco. I don't think that's what he has in view. At least I don't think that's what he has in view. Maybe he does. I don't know.
If he means that, we can't go to Café du Monde over in Baton Rouge.
Yeah,
actually, Baton Rouge. That is literally a French word for a town. Would towns like would states have to change their names? How far can we take this?
Language is so hard to learn because there's so many words incorporated from other like bizarre, and we just we'd be here all day. Deja vu.
No, I'm just being nitpicky. I know what he means. He's talking about like instructions and things like that. I agree with that. So yeah, English only. All right. Anyway, back to the video. Sorry about that.
What about the signs at HEB that say food stamps accepted here?
Yeah.
Saw that yesterday.
Yep.
Don't love it.
Number one, get rid of welfare. So no food stamps. Number two, if you got to have food stamps for a while and you're weaning the nation off of welfare as you're changing policies, it's written in English. And if you can't read English, go back.
If you can't read English, go back. How about if you can't read English, learn it? I don't know.
That was a deep argument there. You can't learn it, go back. Yeah, I mean, you should be fluent in English if you live in the United States. Yeah. Unless is that you made elderly grandma comes over, son's gonna take care of her. Okay, sure. But for the most part, if you're going to be like a worker, if you're going to like just basically live here, go to a restaurant, order food, or go to the gas station to fill your gas up, yeah, you should know English. I don't think anybody is going to disagree with that. Maybe you could verbalize it a little differently. Like, go back. Sometimes when Pastor Webbon says stuff like that, like I think he called Viva Ramaswamy Haji or hijab or something like that, and
Oh,
said
yeah.
the same thing about the future second lady. He sounds like an ignorant, person from like almost like a Peckerwood or something like that. When he makes statements like that, it's so strange to me. When he talks like that, it's just so bizarre. Like that's not what I expect from a reformed pastor. I can't think of any parallel.
I think that he's just going for shock value sometimes.
Okay.
I think. I mean, that's the only thing I can make sense. The only thing I can think of to make sense of it is that he's just going for shock value. It's worked for him. His channel has grown, and he's always kind of had a shock value sort of tone. But yeah, he really has taken it up quite a few notches.
Oh, don't have Hitler as your role model because that's retarded. I guess maybe it's a generational thing too. Maybe because
are you and I boomers? Do we have boomer
Gen
brain?
X. I'm Gen X, so they don't get as hit as hard as the boomers, but they do get thrown into the mix.
Listen. I'm not. Hold on. Let me explain something to you, okay? Boomer is more than just when you were born. It's a state of mind. All right. And so maybe we've just got some boomer brain. Now you can't have an American state of mind according to Joel, because you have to have lineage and land ties.
Why is
but you can have a boomer brain state of mind.
So Calvin, in one of his commentaries on Daniel, I love John Calvin. I hate to say this. I think it was Daniel chapter 2. He's interacting with this Jewish person. And he says, I have not met a single Jewish person who had any common sense. He says that in the commentary. So why is the pre-war consensus something that we should be striving for? Sure, there's a lot of true stuff that was said prior to the post-war consensus, but I don't really understand. Like a lot of what they say, like, oh well, the Crusades, we were lied to about that, and all of this reconstructionism. Aren't there some things in the post-war consensus that are actually true and helpful and beneficial? I don't know.
That what they're talking about is as far from reconstructionism as possible. Okay, they're natural law guys. I know what you were saying. I know what you meant. I'm just making the joke because reconstructionism, theonomy versus natural law. No, okay, all right. Sorry, bad joke. All right. Yeah, get rid of welfare. He also mentions that. Absolutely, 100%. You are on the money with that.
You gotta do that progressively, though. I can't just do that overnight.
No,
even more problems if you do that. More homeless people.
Of course not. But it's got to come. At some point. Slash it. It's Ron.
Yeah, I think he'd probably agree because he doesn't think that we should just take the prison system away overnight. That should be a progressive thing that we eventually get to. I think you probably would agree with the same thing with welfare. Let's slowly get off of it. Yeah, and that's really a question. Should that be something that the church handles anyway? It seems like we've just made the state into sort of like this messiah that just takes care of everything.
Well, he wants to get rid of the welfare, but the way that you do that is through sphere sovereignty, not natural law. I mean, I'm just saying. Anyway, we're almost done here, guys. Thank you for sticking around if you are watching this far into the video. Let's do the last bit of it, and then we'll do our final comments, and we'll wrap it up. And if I could just pull this back up. There it is. Let's go.
Go back. This is
a whole country that speaks your language, which is awesome for you.
This is America. We are a Christian nation, and we are an English nation. And people can come, but they must come and be Christian. They must be want to be eventually American, or at least their children's children, that their family, their posterity would become American. So they love the Lord Jesus Christ. They also love American heritage and want to be grafted into it. And part of that is a willingness and an eagerness to fully assimilate.
Okay, so this is the last bit of it that we're going to talk about here. There must be a willingness and an eagerness to fully assimilate. He actually kind of caught himself for a second because he's like, they must come over here. They must want to become American, or at least their children's children, their grandchildren. I'm like, you almost caught yourself there, sir. Admitting that you know that realistically people can become Americans. So why would you say that they should have a desire to assimilate again if they can never be true Americans? That's just, what are you talking about? You say they have to be willing to. They have to do everything that is American. They have to be willing. And you know what? If they do it, they won't be Americans. Their children won't be American. But okay, we can look at the grandchildren. That's insane.
He wants them to assimilate to not be true Americans.
Correct.
Exactly. Said. So they would sort of be partial Americans, I guess, from his perspective, or his fellow countrymen, just not his fellow citizens, which is the way he phrased it earlier on in the video.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a little murky. I understand the desire to want to maintain American culture and not have it run over by Middle Eastern cultures, which are primarily Islamic, maybe some Latino cultures, which are primarily Roman Catholic and distinctively Latino Roman Catholic, and obviously atheistic cultures from China or places like that, of course. But for me, it's all about worldview. You know, I don't think that's the case for them. Because if you read maybe Stephen Wolf, maybe listen to some other guys, for them, even assimilation can't necessarily take place if you're a Presbyterian Englishman, perhaps. So, I mean, that's like there's a whole conversation to be had there. Is faith enough? It is for me, but it's not enough for them. So we'd have to kind of flesh out some of the disagreements that we have in that area and kind of work through those. I don't think let me just point out some of the things that we've talked about. I don't think language is as big a barrier as they seem to think. You've seen James White talk about this on The Dividing Line, how he goes overseas and you have a translator and there's a tremendous fellowship there. I know that my father, he was like a lay pastor for a while at a Wesleyan church, and we went to India one time and he preached in English because he just wasn't comfortable speaking in Gujarati anymore. And we had a translator there. And again, there wasn't really this huge barrier because of language. A lot of people speak multiple languages. So it's not as big a barrier as he thinks, but certainly if you want to even grant that's a barrier, because, you know, obviously you have to be able to speak English fluently. I mean, Paul obviously wrote his letters in Greek, a language that the people could understand. If you are able to overcome that particular barrier, why would faith be a road? Why would, if you have the same faith as somebody else, why is that still a roadblock? It is for him. It is for the Wolfian crowd.
Yeah,
that's definitely a conversation to be had, and it's probably there's probably a lot of layers to it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think this about does it, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, that was fun. We just did a lot of ranting.
That's what this video is all about, man.
I mean, the last interview that we had, it was really focused, you know, deliverance ministry. I had notes, everything. It was just like neatly packed. This is more of like I guess this is more conversational style, I suppose.
Absolutely. Which one do you like more, personally?
Well, like when I do videos, they're like, if you ever see my videos, they're like super structured.
I know, man. I mean, you have. Well, I think that's the appeal of your channel. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very compact, very informative set of videos, and I think a lot of people need that. But I would imagine that a lot of people listening to this are probably like, you know, truck drivers, maybe even like moms at home trying to take care of like the laundry and things like that. And so they're, you know, because even at work for me, I'm listening to podcasts, you know, and sermons and things like that. And, you know, it just depends on the situation. So I'm making this as an option for you guys that are listening in right now while you are driving or working or whatever it might be. Alan, my friend, appreciate you, brother.
Thank you for having me, man. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah. And for you guys that stuck around with us, thank you very, very much. Hey, guys, if you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, please leave right now. Get out of here. And if you enjoyed the content that I am making here, please go ahead and subscribe, share the video, make sure that you are putting it out there, because there are a lot of people talking about this issue right now that we're talking about right now. And I don't know if everybody's getting a concise breakdown of videos like the one that we just watched. So go ahead and subscribe, share the video, and as always, God bless you guys. Until next time, take care.